Welcome, welcome. Look at you, looking so good. Ah, madam, you are here. We hail you, oh.
The day Ngozi Okafor drove into the compound in a black SUV with British plates, wearing sunglasses that cost more than 3 months of her sister's salary, and announced that she had come home to take care of her children and her investments. The whole street of Rumuola in Port Harcourt felt it before they fully understood it. They felt it the way you feel a shift in weather, something in the atmosphere changing, pressure dropping, the particular silence before a thing that cannot be undone begins to happen. Adana Okafor, Ngozi's younger sister, was in the kitchen when she heard the car. She had been making egusi soup with the focused attentiveness of a woman who cooks not just for sustenance but for love. Chiamaka had asked specifically for egusi that morning, the way a 14-year-old asks for things, which is to say without asking, just by mentioning it 3 times and hovering near the kitchen. Adana had laughed and started soaking the melon seeds before the child was even out of earshot. She wiped her hands on her wrapper and went to the parlor window. And there was Ngozi, tall, polished, foreign in that particular way that people become foreign after a long time away, not in their faces but in the set of their bodies, the way they occupy space as if it belongs to them in a different currency than the rest of you. Ngozi was smiling at the neighbors who had already gathered, smiling the wide, easy smile of the returning successful, the smile that says, "I made it, I came back, receive me." Adana stood at the window for a moment. Her hand smelled of crayfish and palm oil. There was a small burn on her left forearm from 3 weeks ago when hot oil had spat from the pan, and Chiamaka had blown on it and said sorry, auntie, with such earnestness that Adana had almost cried. She looked at her sister in the compound below, and she felt something she could not immediately name, something that was not quite fear and not quite grief and not quite anger, but lived in the neighborhood of all three. The arrangement had begun 9 years ago, when Ngozi got the visa.
Shh, it's okay now. I'm right here. Shh, go to sleep.
It had not been planned as an arrangement at first. It had begun as a temporary thing, the kind of temporary that Nigerian families tell themselves when the alternative is too heavy to hold. Ngozi had a UK student visa, a place at a university in Sheffield, and 2 children, Chiamaka, who was 5, and Tabena, who was 3. Her husband Emeka had left the marriage 2 years before, not loudly, not dramatically, just incrementally, the way some men leave, becoming less present and then absent and then a phone number that sometimes answered. He was in Abuja. He had another family. He sent money occasionally when guilt overcame inertia. Ngozi could not take the children to the UK. She had no support system, no money yet for childcare, no stability. She would build the stability first and then send for them. 6 months, she said. Maybe a year. Adana, who was 26 and unmarried and living in the family house, said yes before Ngozi finished the sentence. Of course, they were family. They were her niece and nephew. 6 months, a year. Of course. Chiamaka had cried for 2 weeks when her mother left. She had pressed herself against Adana's side at night and woken crying in the dark, and Adana had held her and sung to her and told her Mummy would come back. Mummy was going to get a better life for them. Mummy loved them. Tabena was too young to understand the leaving but old enough to feel the absence, and he had become quieter and clingier in ways that broke Adana's heart in small daily pieces. 6 months became a year became 2. The money Ngozi sent was consistent at first, every month, enough for school fees and feeding and a little extra. But life in the UK had its own gravity, its own expenses, its own emergencies. The transfers became irregular, then smaller. Adana did not complain. She adjusted. She had been working as an admin officer at a private clinic in Rumuola, and she stretched her salary the way women who have learned scarcity stretch things, carefully, creatively, with the particular ingenuity that necessity produces.
E-N-T. Patient.
Yes, that's right. Very good. Keep going.
She cooked. She plaited Chiamaka's hair every Sunday morning, while the child chattered about school and friends and the things children chatter about when they feel safe. She attended to Bena's inter-house sports and stood at the edge of the field shouting his name, with the full-throated enthusiasm of a woman who had decided, without deliberating the decision, that these children were hers to love completely and she would not love them halfway just because the paperwork said otherwise. She taught Chiamaka to read the time on an analog clock at age 6, then to cook rice at age 10, then to manage money at age 12, counting change from the market, understanding the difference between what you want and what you can afford. She sat with Tabena every evening for 2 years when his teacher said he was slow at reading, reading to him patiently, building in him a love of story that would later make him the boy who always had a book and was always slightly somewhere else in his head, which drove his teachers slightly mad and made Adana quietly proud. I have to stop here and ask, where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. This story is for everyone who has ever sacrificed quietly for family, and I want to know you're out there. Drop your location and let's continue. Ngozi called. She called regularly in the beginning, fast time on Sundays. The children crowding around the phone, Ngozi's face on the screen looking glamorous and slightly unreal against whatever UK backdrop she was in front of. She told them about the snow, about the university, about her part-time job at a care home, about the friends she was making. She asked after the children's school, their health, their eating. She told Adana she was grateful. She said it often and with apparent sincerity, and Adana believed her because she had no reason not to. As the years went on, the calls became less frequent. Ngozi had finished her degree and gotten a job in healthcare administration. She had moved from Sheffield to London. She had, Adana gathered from the sparse updates, also met someone, a Nigerian man named Dili, who had been in the UK for 15 years and had papers and a house in Peckham. This last information arrived not from Ngozi directly but from their mother, who had gotten it from a cousin, which was how important family information often traveled in their world. Sideways, through the network, arriving already slightly altered. Adana did not resent the distance. She had made peace with it the way you make peace with the shape of your life. When you have been living it long enough, she had also, in the 9 years of raising her sister's children, been building something of her own, slowly, carefully, the way people build who cannot afford to waste. With a small loan from a cooperative she had joined at her church, she had opened a provision store in a corner of the compound. It had begun as a table with a plastic covering and a few items, seasoning cubes, sachets of salt, small bags of gari, biscuits for the neighborhood children. Within 2 years it had grown into a proper shop with a refrigerator, a POS machine, and a supplier relationship that gave her better prices than the market. She had hired a girl, Precious, who came every day after school and managed the evening rush. She had also, with the accumulated savings of 6 years of careful living, bought the house. This deserves its own sentence, its own weight, because in Port Harcourt, in a neighborhood like Rumuala, buying land and building a house is not a small thing. It is the thing. It is what separates the people who are passing through from the people who have arrived. Adana had done it quietly, transaction by transaction, building by building, without announcement. The children knew, because the children lived there and had watched the foundation go down and the walls go up, and had painted their bedroom walls themselves, Kiyomaka choosing yellow, Tabena insisting on blue. Their mother did not know the full extent of what Adana had built. The updates Adana gave Ngozi were honest but incomplete. The way you describe a painting to someone who isn't in the room, they understand the colors, but not the scale, the subjects, but not the feeling of standing in front of it. And then Ngozi came home. She came alone. Dili had stayed in London, managing something, she said vaguely. She came with 4 large suitcases and the black SUV which belonged to a cousin who had come to pick her from the airport. She came with gifts, clothes for the children, shoes, chocolates, things bought in a hurry from duty-free that had the feeling of catching up rather than knowing. Kiyomaka, who was 14 and had her mother's face and her auntie's practicality, received her gift politely and said, "Thank you," with the measured warmth of a teenager who has learned not to give herself away too quickly. Tabena, 12, was more openly delighted. He was still at the age where a gift was a gift and the complicated history behind the giving of it was someone else's business. The first week was manageable. Ngozi admired the house, said, "You have done well," Adana with the particular tone of someone who is genuinely impressed and also slightly displaced by their own impression. She unpacked in the master bedroom, naturally, because it was the larger room, and she was the elder sister, and these facts seemed to her sufficient. And Adana moved her things to the room she had previously used as a study without being asked and without mentioning that she had not been asked. The second week, things began to show their shape. Ngozi started making changes, small ones at first, rearranging the kitchen, buying new curtains that she preferred without consulting Adana, telling Precious at the shop that she should defer to her for any decisions above a certain amount. She said these things not with malice but with the breezy authority of someone who has been away and returned and assumed that the absence was the anomaly and the return was the restoration of the natural order. She began referring to the house as my house, not to provoke, or at least not consciously. It came out naturally, in the way that people reveal their assumptions, through the casual phrasing of ordinary sentences. When I renovate my house, she said to a neighbor, my house needs new tiles in the bathroom. Adana heard it each time. She kept a careful face. She also began referring to the children differently. My children need to change schools, she told Adana one evening. The school they're in is fine, but I know a better one in GRA. Private, international curriculum. Adana said, they have exams in 3 months. Changing schools now would disrupt them. Ngozi said, I am their mother. I know what is best for them. There was a pause that held many things. Then Adana said, yes, you are, and went back to the kitchen. The shop was the real battlefield, though nobody used the word battlefield yet. Ngozi had looked at the accounts. Adana had kept meticulous records, ledger books going back 6 years, and her eyes had changed when she saw the numbers. Not dramatically, just a slight recalibration, the way eyes change when something is more valuable than expected. This is good, she said. Really good, Adana. And then, a week later, I was thinking, since I'm back now, maybe I should take a more active role. I have business experience from the UK. I could help grow it. Adana had looked at her sister. The shop is mine, she said. Simple, clear, without anger. I built it with my own money and my own labor. The house also is mine. I have documents. I can show you. Ngozi had been quiet for a moment. Then she said, I sent money for this house. I sent money all those years. You sent money for the children, Adana said, for their school fees and feeding. I have the records of what came and what was spent. The rest, the house, the shop, came from my work. You lived here for free for 9 years, Ngozi said, and her voice had changed now, the pleasantness draining from it like water from a cracked bowl. The land was family land. You used family resources. The land was bought, Adana said. I have the deed. The building was paid for by me. I can show you every receipt. Hold on, I need to stop here and ask you again. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. And if you've ever been in a situation where family tried to take credit for what you built alone, type I understand Adana in the comments. Let's see how this plays out. Ngozi did not shout. This was perhaps the most difficult part. She did not shout, did not cry, did not do the things that would have made the conflict legible and resolvable. She simply became cold, in the way that some people become cold, which is to say she became very polite and very distant and began operating in the house as though Adana were a guest, rather than a resident, speaking to her only when necessary, moving through the kitchen and the compound with a choreography that avoided contact. The children felt it immediately. Kiyomaka came to Adana's room one night and sat on the bed and said nothing for a long time and then said, Are you leaving? Adana said, No. Kiyomaka said, Mommy is acting like this is her house and you are a visitor. Adana said, I know. Kiyomaka said, It's not right. And Adana, who had been raised by a mother who said that you did not speak ill of family to family, found herself saying, Your mother loves you, Kiyomaka. That part has always been true. Kiyomaka looked at her with eyes that were older than 14. That's not what I asked, she said. Tabena handled it differently. He began to oscillate, spending time with his mother in the evenings, because she was new and she was his mother and part of him still needed to try, but gravitating toward Adana for the small daily things, the homework questions, the nighttime conversation, the habitual warmth of 9 years. Ngozi noticed this and it hurt her, and the hurt expressed itself as criticism of Adana's cooking, of the way the children spoke. They used too much Igbo, they need to practice their English. Of the shop accounts, some of these margins are too low. Of small things that were really proxies for the large unspeakable thing. It was their mother who ended it. Mama Okafor, who was 73 and lived in the family home in Oguta, but had been told about the situation by approximately 6 different people before anyone thought to tell her directly, arrived in Port Harcourt on a Wednesday without announcement, the way old Nigerian mothers arrive when they have decided that their presence is required, like weather, like a verdict. She arrived in a minibus with 1 bag, and the air of a woman who had seen everything, survived most of it, and was no longer interested in any form of foolishness. She sat both daughters down in the parlor. She asked for tea. She drank it. Then she said, Who built this house? Ngozi said, The land was. I didn't ask about the land, Mama said. I asked, Who built the house? Silence. Adana built it, Ngozi said. Her voice was quiet. Who raised your children? Mama said. Ngozi was quiet for a long time. Adana did, she said, finally. And where were you? It was not a cruel question the way Mama Okafor asked it. It was a precise one. An old woman who had done her own share of sacrifice asking another woman to stand in the full light of the truth she had been avoiding. Ngozi's face did something complicated. Underneath all the lace and the London weight and the practiced confidence of a woman who had made something of herself abroad, something much younger and more uncertain surfaced. I was building a life, Ngozi said. I was trying to make something so we could all have a better life. So was Adana, Mama said. But Adana was building it here. She was building it with your children on her back. Ngozi looked at her sister, and Adana, who had not cried through any of this. Not when the curtains were changed without asking. Not when my house was said in front of the neighbors. Not when Kiyomaka came to her room with old eyes and asked if she was leaving. Adana now felt her throat close. I needed you, Ngozi said, and her voice broke. I couldn't take them. I couldn't. She stopped, swallowed. It was supposed to be a year. 9 years, Adana said, not angrily, just as a number placed on the table between them. 9 years, Ngozi said, and she put her face in her hands. Mama Okafor let the silence do its work. She understood, as old mothers understand, that certain reckoning cannot be rushed. Then she said, now, what are we going to do? What they did, over the following weeks, was imperfect and human and real. Ngozi acknowledged, in writing, that the house belonged to Adana, not because Adana asked for it in writing but because Mama had insisted, quietly, that unspoken agreements had already caused enough trouble. The shop remained Adana's. Ngozi found a flat to rent nearby, because she needed her own space and the house, for all its size, was too full of history for two sisters to inhabit without collisions. They began, slowly, to talk. Real talking, not the polite exchange of information that they had been doing, but the harder kind. The kind that requires you to say I was wrong, and I was afraid and I did not know how to ask for what I needed and I am sorry. Ngozi said these things on an evening when the children were at a neighbor's house, and they sat together on the veranda with bottles of Malta and the particular honesty that comes when there is nothing left to protect. Ngozi said, I used to lie in bed in Sheffield thinking about them, thinking about Kiyomaka's face when I left. I kept thinking 1 more year, then I'll send for them. And then it became, they're settled now, Adana has them. They're in school, if I take them now I'll disrupt everything, 1 more year. And I told myself that because it was easier than the truth. What was the truth? Adana asked. That I was ashamed, Ngozi said. That I came back and you had done everything I failed to do and you did it without complaining and you loved my children better than I managed to love them from a distance and it made me feel, she searched for the word, small. And I turned that smallness into anger at you. Because that is easier than sitting with shame. Adana was quiet for a moment. Then she said, you didn't fail them. You gave them a future. The degree, the connections you have from the UK, that is for them too. What you did abroad was also for them. But I missed them growing up, Ngozi said. Yes, Adana said, you did. And she did not try to comfort that away, because it was true and it deserved to be true. And Ngozi needed to hold it without it being dissolved into something smaller than it was. Kiyomaka, when she was older, when she was 23 and studying law, and writing an essay about women and sacrifice for a university competition, would write about 2 women who raised her. She would describe her mother as the one who built the road that led away from poverty, and her auntie as the one who stood at the beginning of the road and made sure she was ready to walk it. She would say that she used to think love was one person's job, that a child had one mother and that was the architecture of care. And then she grew up inside a different architecture and understood that love, real love, is not diminished by being given by more than one person, it multiplies. Tobena, at 21, would dedicate his first published short story, a quiet, precise thing about a boy who grows up between 2 mothers, to Annie Ada, who read to me until I loved it. Adana did not become a saint in this story. She remained human. There were days she resented the years she had given, days she looked at her own unmarried life and wondered what she might have chosen differently if the children had not needed her so completely. She had loved, but love had also cost her things, and she was honest enough with herself to know both were true. But she also knew, with the particular certainty of someone who has lived inside a decision long enough to see its full shape, that she had not been wrong. She had been needed, and she had stayed, and what had grown from that staying was not just 2 good children, but also a house, a shop, a life that was fully and completely hers, built by her hands, owned by her name, answerable to no one. The house on Romuald still stands. The shop still opens at 7 in the morning and closes at 9 at night. Precious, who is no longer a girl from the neighborhood but a young woman with shares in the business and ambitions of her own, manages the evening shift. The spare room, which Ngozi used briefly when she first arrived and tried to claim everything, has been painted cream and turned into a reading room, Adana's room, for Adana's books, because she has earned the luxury of a room just for herself. Some debts cannot be repaid. Some gifts are simply gifts given in the quiet without receipt, without guarantee of recognition, without knowing if the giving will ever be seen for what it was. Adana had given 9 years, and then more, and what she received in return was not what she gave. It was not supposed to be. You do not give love as a loan, expecting the same denomination returned. You give it and it becomes part of the world, and the world is changed by it in ways you may never fully see. But sometimes, not always, not neatly, not without the messy human work of confession and accountability, sometimes the world lets you see. And Adana, on a Thursday evening with her niece's law textbooks on her reading room shelf and her sister's number saved in her phone under Ngozi, rather than the longer complicated name it had been for a while, thought that she had seen enough. It was, as such things go, enough. If this story moved something in you today, if you have ever been in Adana, quietly building while others were away, or a Ngozi, coming back to face what you owe, drop a comment below. And tell me where you're watching from. Share this story with someone who needs to feel seen today. These stories exist because you are out there listening, and I am grateful for every one of you. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next one.